You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Kinesic.
Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Kinesic, and welcome to episode 207.
Do you have a...
I did not look that up. I don't want to make that like a weekly thing. That's a... I got to throw it out there every once in a while.
I tried to do a little...
I think that would be grating if I did it every week.
I tried to do a little preparation. It's funny when you come up with some of these numbers that don't have a significance. It wants to give like your... like what its significant is as an angel number.
Oh, I've never even heard of that.
Either did I. I kind of didn't dive any deeper into that. I was like, I'm gonna pass.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what that is, what the significance is of that. But cool.
But yeah, we have an in-person guest today, also a recurring guest.
Very cool.
Yeah, so we are joined by Mike Curran, who we were just saying on last April. So I don't remember the episode number.
About a year. It was called Black Gold.
It was called Black Gold. Yeah. Yeah, and that was an episode that really talked about his work with the oil industry out in Wyoming. But a lot's happened in the last year. So
it has. It actually just got knocked out of our top 10. Sad news.
I don't know if you should have told him that.
Yeah, well,
so he's sitting right here.
But it was in the top 10 for quite some time, which was very exciting. Yep. But eventually, everyone gets knocked out of the top 10. So yeah, Mike, how's it going?
Good. It's good to be here in person, and I'm glad to be back here. Glad that I got to take a tour with you guys on this property, I think in October.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of crazy. I know for us on our end, when you were on the podcast that morning, Terry Doss from the New Jersey Exposition, it's NJESA, Sports Authority?
Yes, SEA.
SEA, which is the former Meadowlands Commission, if I remember correctly. And then it was changed to the NJSEA. She contacted us that morning, excited about the work that you were doing, thought that it would translate well. She had some ideas in New Jersey, and knowing that you were originally from New Jersey, asked for your contact information to get in touch. Terry's a former guest also when we talked about the NJSEA. So what's happened since it's been a year? What's happened to you since? Let's start there. Since you've been on the podcast.
Sure. It's been a pretty crazy year. I think I was just getting ready to go out to Wyoming last time we talked. Yeah, and I did get an email from Terry, I think the afternoon of our last podcast. I went up to the Meadowlands. I've been there 2 or 3 times now to meet Terry and Drew McQuaid with NJSEA. We did put a grant into the EPA. We were looking to study insects and food webs in that Phragmites into Spartina kind of gradient up in the Meadowlands. Yeah. Unfortunately, we didn't get the funding this year. I ran into Terry at Doug Ptolemy's talk at Monmouth University in February, and I think we're still going to pursue it. I think that Ptolemy's talk just kind of reinforced the importance of understanding that food web, how insects are responding to the native grass system or reed system versus the Phragmites system. So I'm still going to remain excited about that.
And I know Terry had reached out to us. I'm trying to remember how long ago, saying that the government was a little hesitant to put more money into Spartina. It's not really remediation. It's what would you call it?
Well, I would say it's not restoration.
It's not restoration. It's a remediation.
It probably is remediation. Yeah.
Saying because they feel that with climate change and sea level rise, that Phragmites is serving an ecological service. She was just asking for ideas and thoughts of what we thought about that. And my first response was Lepidoptera, because I think Phragmites only hosts 3 and Spartina hosts 26. So for biodiversity, but the other big thing for me was, I think once you hit seawater salt, like salinity, I think you lose 50% of the Phragmites. So it's not sustainable. If you get seawater rise and the salinity goes up, you're going to lose that where Spartina can tolerate it. But
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it may be a little short-sighted there that the ecosystem services they're looking at Phragmites or biomass and the ability to kind of buffer rise, but they're not looking into salinity and they're not looking into the terrestrial food web. So that's exactly what we wanted to study. And yeah, obviously if we have 26 Lepidopteran hosted in the native Spartina versus 3 in the Phragmites, we're probably going to see bigger bird populations and, other food web benefits from that. So,
and you want visitors at the Meadowlands, right? Like if the birders already love that area, if you can increase the biodiversity of birds, I think that would be a win-win.
Yeah.
And better ecosystem. Like as far as Phragmites is going to hold the soil, but not if you lose 50% of it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, I thought it was cool. Drew McQuaid from NJSEA and I went out on one of their research boats. They've got the busiest train in North America, if not the world, that goes through that every day. So I think that would be really cool if I was sitting on that train from Newark Penn Station to New York Penn Station, I would like to know that there's more biodiversity out my window than otherwise.
Now, in continuing to pursue that, you kind of mentioned off the air that you may be looking at bringing someone on the team to help with that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so after Doug Ptolemy's talk at Monmouth, there was a kind of a reception. Terry and Doug and actually Bill Young was there and Bob Swain. But we were all talking, and that Ptolemy actually has done quite a bit of work with Phragmites. He did mention the interesting thing with Phragmites in its native system, which is not here. It hosts, I think, above 30 species of Lepidopteran. Here, it's only hosting 3. So he had a lot of good ideas of, how to justify getting rid of it and increasing the natives. And I think he was interested in joining that team if we can figure out how to get the funding for it.
Now, some of the hard things for that, and I know we're already off topic, but I guess there is no topic. We're just going to go where it goes. But I know we read an article that in Australia where they say that Phragmites is native, it can remediate PFAS. It can phytoremediate PFAS. So I don't know if it's performing that function. I mean, there's a lot of it in the Meadowlands.
Yeah, that's the first I'm ever hearing of that, so I can't comment too much on it. But, I mean, that would be a pretty cool and good thing.
I don't know how much, but that would be kind of cool if it remediates it, and then you can cut it off and get it out of there and then replace it with something that will perform better.
One perk about, and this is getting way off topic, but one perk about working in the Meadowlands, and this is something I just had for the first time last week, there's a place called Rutt's Hut. That's,
in Clifton?
In Clifton.
Where they do the...
Have you been there? I was just looking, it's right, it's maybe 10 minutes from the NJSEA headquarters.
They do the deep fried
hot dogs. It's like a deep fried hot dog, but the casing like rips and
splits open. What do they call them? Rippers? They call rippers. Yeah.
They were. I had 2 for the first time last week. They were amazing.
It's considered the best hot dog place in New Jersey. One of the best.
I think one of the best in the country.
Yeah. If it's the best in New Jersey, it's probably the best in the country.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
That is true. So, you have to go.
Now it's not far. So I had to go up to that meeting in New York, and I went up and I was like, you know what? I'm always driving by this place and it's like nighttime. So, or I shouldn't say by, but near it. So I'm like, I have an opportunity to get it for dinner. I'm going to go get these for dinner now. And then I was considering turning around and going back after I finished them like 5 minutes later. I'm like, maybe on the way home, I'll stop here too. It was that good. So, so that's a perk of working in the Meadowlands as well.
That's good to know.
Like a lot of people will say Hot Dog Johnny is the best by the Water Gap, but it's a different Hot Dog Johnny's is part of a destination to me. Yeah. It's a good hot dog, but it's not like crazy you have to eat their hot dog. Mm-hmm. But Rutt's Hut, it's a it's a different experience. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, we're getting off.
Yeah, sorry about that. It was like I started thinking about it. I'm like, that's right there. And all I could start thinking about was hot dogs again.
Well, I think if you're able to include Doug Ptolemy with his research on a project like this, it's got to hold more weight, I would think. Not that all of you collectively don't hold weight. I don't mean it that way, but it does bring
the world expert, really. So.
Yeah. So that's exciting. So what else has happened Besides, because have you been here for the last year now, or once you came back from Wyoming, have you been here the whole time?
Not real. So I went. Yeah, when I was going out to Wyoming last time, I was thinking I was going out there for like 3 weeks. That wound up. I thought I was going to land in Greeley, Colorado on May 31st. Go up to Boise, Idaho for the American Society of Reclamation Sciences Conference, do some work in Pinedale, Wyoming, and a little bit of work in North Dakota, and come home. I wound up, being out west till the middle of October, I think, right before and then I came home, and one of the first days I was home, me and Bill Young came up here and checked out your guys' facility. This year so far, since the calendar year, I'm flying to Denver on Friday. I got to talk at a sage grouse meeting in Cheyenne, Wyoming on Monday. I think that's going to be the 4th or 5th time this year already I've been out west. There's a lot going on with sage grouse and other a lot of issues where reclamation and restoration are becoming very important out in the western states. So been back and forth quite a bit.
You mentioned a court case. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I was contacted by Marty McHugh. I don't know if you remember Marty, one of Bill's buddies.
Marty's former director of U.S. Fish and Wildlife. New Jersey?
No, he's New Jersey.
DEP.
Yeah, New Jersey Fish and Wildlife. Quite a while ago now, but he's been on here,
DEP,
right?
No,
he's supposed to. Was he
he
part
was.
of that panel? Yeah,
for government's role in
long
restoration.
time ago.
But we're going to have him back on as far as putting dollar amounts on wildlife due to natural disasters.
Not natural,
man-made disasters. Sorry,
oil spills and that kind of thing. So
but so he contacted me. What had happened there was 2 cul-de-sacs where these 2 neighbors abutting at the end of each cul-de-sac. There was a state forest in between their lands. The new neighbor came in and clear cut a big chunk of the forest and puts a trampoline, a woodshed, a swing set in the yard. The other neighbor, it's a husband and wife. The wife is a huge birder. They're saying the best part of our property is we like to sit on our back porch and watch the birds and the wildlife, and now we watch your kids jumping on the trampoline, and our privacy's gone.
Yeah.
Well, Marty, because his former role in the state, he was conflicted. He couldn't be an expert witness. Yep. So, the law firm that was defending helping the people that lost all their privacy, I wound up working with them, and it was actually really fun. I went in, did kind of an inventory of what was there before. I looked at some satellite imagery. They had a realtor on, and the realtor said, this is at least $80,000 property value lost because the view shed's gone. You're not supposed to cut the native state forest anyway. But I went in and figured out, this tree is going to take probably 60 to 75 years to grow back. This is all the ecosystem services it provides. I was looking at not only the food web services, but the carbon sequestration services and other things like that. We actually started to see a Phragmites invasion because you cut the shade out, and off the little stream that ran through the backyard, we started getting these invasions in there. So I just did kind of a real big ecosystem service study, gave it to the lawyer and said, this is how much it would cost to plant all these things, how long it would take for them to grow. And we basically found that landowner in his lifetime isn't going to see that property value back. But that was really fun. It's the first time I did expert witness stuff, and gave me a nice insight into the legal system. And for me, it was fun because I just looked at it like a research project. And
was it successful?
They won.
All right.
Yeah.
I was going to say, when you're approached with something like that, how do you go in and determine, hey, these are the experiments I'm going to run? This is what I'm going to try and measure. How do you determine what you're going to do?
The first thing I actually did there was they gave me a property map, and I just went online. I looked at a ton of satellite imagery, and you could actually see between one image and the next what was cut out. And I said, this is what this actually looked like. Let me kind of compare it. And then I went out there so I had a pretty good idea what I was walking into when I went out there. And then it was clear as day. The property owner actually had old pictures of what it used to look like. And then I'm sitting there, I'm like, I would be pretty, upset if I used to get to sit on my back porch and see all this wildlife, and now this is what I see.
I get, because for me, like that's I'm on a house that butts up against. It's kind of like the sewage drainage stream that goes through, and there's like houses on the other side of it. And I don't know how thick it is, but I can't see the neighbor. Like in the winter, you can see his pool. It's far enough, but we sit out on the back deck and listen for birds and take photos, and like that's our favorite thing to do. If you took that away, like that would be massive. And it's that the complex was built 60 years ago, so you figure it's at least 60 years worth of growth.
Right. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I was doing then when I went out there in person, was what's here, what did the old imagery kind of look like, and then okay, here's the vegetation that was here. Here's what we can actually get from a nursery. And then at that, it's like, we can put some of these trees from 2-gallon pots. And if they're only putting on 18 inches of growth a year, that's going to take some of these trees, and the reference are 70 to 85 feet tall. So it's like, okay, if we start at a 2-gallon pot, here's what it is, and this is what it costs. If we go to a 15-gallon pot, the cost per tree is going to probably triple or quadruple, just based on how long it's sitting in the nursery. So that's kind of the way I did that, and then it just becomes really a restoration project of how long is this going to take to happen, and I gave like 3 or 4 different scenarios of, we could start from seed to 1 gallon to 2 gallon to 15 gallon to, we can transplant stuff, and then I think what the other legal team came back and said, our guys screwed up and we're going to do the restoration. So they had, I think, pay for a landscaping company to come in and install and everything like that. So,
and plus the amount of money I would imagine that homeowner shelled out to remove that. Like just thinking like the size of the trees, I'm like, all right, that's not cheap.
Yeah. It's funny how often that happens too. Because another friend of mine just told me, I don't know how many details I want to give up here. So, but he told me about something similar but it was a golf course, and they just went and did cut down 20 acres of state forest.
Oh wow!
And expanded the golf course, and then claimed ignorance when someone caught on to it, and it was just and he's like, I don't know who in the right mind just does that. Someone knew where the property line was, and they were definitely alerted that this is not your property, or not maybe by someone internally, not by someone externally, but he's like, and he's in that case, he was basically saying how he's the course had so much money that they're like, okay, well fine us, and we'll pay it off. Wow. So
that's crazy.
But it happens all the time. There's people who just go in and say, okay, I'm going to go do this. And a lot of times knowingly know that it's not, they don't have a right to do. They just don't see what the harm is because it's good for them.
They're just hoping to get away with it. Yeah. But I would imagine this homeowner, if they just moved there, they would know what the property line is because you're getting a survey when you purchase the house. So they had a plan we could just cut this down and no one will know.
Well, that's not necessarily true. No? They might not have, because I've seen with with a lot of real estate agents, they will
that's true,
blur the lines on what's actually there or not. Interestingly, this is actually in Wyoming. Something that's happening is there's a whole corner crossing case. Have you heard about this out in Wyoming?
Yeah, it's big.
It's a big deal out there. And what it is when they parceled out the properties in that part of the country, they made 1 mile by 1 mile blocks.
Okay.
Or 1 mile squares. And then it was a checkerboard, so you couldn't have someone buy up continuous piece of property. So you have checkerboard of private, public, all over. So Wyoming being a place where a lot of people who hunt go, or especially elk hunt go, they go out there, and then you'll have pieces of public land where you can hunt, but to get to them, you have to. This is where the court case comes in: is are you physically crossing private property to do it? Because even though it's the airspace, you're taking a step, and I'm stepping 1 foot from public land to another foot in public land, but that corner is minutely small to like the millimeter, and then my body is passing through private land as I do that. And there's a big court case, and well, I think the hunters had won the first one, but then it got appealed, and but what part of what happened is with the real estate agent, the property owner who bought those parcels, and this is all hearsay from my perspective, but the real estate agents are like, this property is landlocked, so it's basically yours. Even though it's public land, no one else can get to it. And they're coming in with kind of similarly, you have a real estate agent saying this property lost like $5 million or $10 million in value because now it's open to the public instead of being landlocked. Even though it's public land, no one else could get to it except for the landowner. Gotcha. So, yeah, I think the criminal case was dismissed for the hunters, but then there's an appeal on that, and then there's another civil case where the landowner is coming after the hunters saying, you owe me, it's like $5 or $10 million. It's some crazy amount because of the lost value of the property. And it's like, well, realistically, the landowner is under the impression, oh, I have access to this and I can do what I want, but that's not legally the case. So who's at fault there, and who owes him the $10 million is kind of some of it. So yeah, that's where I was saying, like, even though he bought that property or the in New Jersey, they bought that property and said, hey, you have no idea what kind of thing off the record was said from the agent who's trying to sell the property, saying, oh yeah, this is state forest, so it's no one else can get to it, so you can basically do whatever you want.
Well, I know this is off topic, but I recently sold my house that I had owned for 22 years. And when we bought the house, we were sitting, like, we hired a lawyer to do the closing, and we were sitting at the closing, and the real estate agent for the people that were selling the house told us that the in-ground oil tank had been replaced 5 years prior and was a fiberglass lined oil tank, 500-gallon oil tank that was supposed to last for 25 years. So when I sold the house, laws had changed and the oil tanks could no longer be in ground. So I had to have it removed. And I'm like, I'm pushing it. It's like around 28 years old.
Yeah.
Well, when they pulled it out, it wasn't fiberglass lined and it had leaked, and it was probably about a $15,000 remediation for me when I sold the house. But I'm like, how do I go back now?
Yeah.
And go, it was 22 years ago for something that was said that was a lie.
Yeah.
How do I go back and prove that now? Like, I have no proof. Like, no one's going to remember that conversation. I remember it because I bought the house. But I just had to eat it, but it wasn't. I wasn't happy about it.
Yeah. But
I'm happy that at least it was successful, and it probably was a big eye opener to a lot of people that were a part of that case.
Yeah, I think it probably was, and I feel bad for the one landowner. They were I don't know how old exactly, but I mean had children that were beyond the college years. So, they're not.
Watch it. That could be me.
Well, I mean, I just feel bad. They're not going to see the return on that probably in their lifetime, but hopefully the forest will get that return in its lifetime.
One thing, and I'm not knowing a ton about it, but you could even look at it as like an opportunity to say, okay, well now we get to see how it returns, and because the young trees and all the understory stuff is going to provide different habitat than that mature forest does, or mature forest does. So it's like, oh well, now I have an opportunity here to kind of see some different stuff that I might not have otherwise.
You get a little succession. So maybe they still get birds, but maybe they get different birds.
Yeah.
You get those open field birds, something like that, where it just kind of changes. Maybe it opens a whole nother possibility and opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what's always hard, right? Is what timeline are we looking at for, maybe it's a good thing overall for the forest ecosystem and for the next landowner that gets to live there for 40 years. But it stinks for the folks that are retired and it's their favorite thing to do is watch birds off their porch.
Even not just that, the sound value, like you have that wooded buffer that's knocking the sound down. Like all of a sudden it's gone. Not only do you have kids and trampoline and playgrounds, that sound is more prevalent on your property now too. So you just miss that whole buffer. But.
Stay tuned for more of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
Tom, have you checked out the website yet for True Blue Natives?
I was going to, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
I want to show you how easy it is.
Okay.
You have your laptop.
I do.
Type in bluelabel.com, but it's BLEWLABEL.
You're talking to someone who doesn't really know how to spell. So, all right, I'm on.
All right, at the top, there's a next to Centerton Nursery. You want to hit brands.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the very top, you'll see Blue Label plants.
Yeah.
Select that.
Okay.
On the left, there's filters. Hit brand group, and then select True.
All right, all the way at the bottom. Yep. There it is.
Select True Blue Natives.
Okay. Click
and there you go. Look at all the fantastic native plants there. I'm really, really impressed with the selection. I know it's 70. I know it's expanding to 100, but I don't think in a retail setting you're going anywhere and just finding tussock sedge.
Yeah.
Like maybe buttonbush, but like I'm looking like hay sennit fern.
River oats is another cool species that's on here. Jacob's ladder is another one that can be hard to find.
Tufted hairgrass.
So
there are some fantastic, and it's, yes, there's showy. There's bluebells. There's swamp milkweed, butterfly milkweed, things that are fantastic for the environment and pollinators. But some things, if you're trying to do like a restoration in your own property and you have a wetland area and you can get tussock sedge or you can get some of these other things that you need, but they're not readily available. I think it's wonderful that these selections exist and exist in a way that they're noticeable. You can go in and you can look for True Blue Natives. And you can ask for True Blue Native. So there is at the top toolbar a find a dealer.
Yeah, I just put in my location, and I found that I can go to Specca's Nursery or Burns Farm Market and a bunch of other places that are all within like 5-10 miles.
I had Magnolia Garden Center, which is 1.5 miles from my house. So even if they don't have them in stock, you can go and ask. They carry these plants. So you have a means. It's amazing, especially in the East Coast. You have a means of finding these plants.
Yeah.
And I love that they've made it accessible. The quality's fantastic. They're doing it for the right reasons. It's everything that you've been asking for, and now you have a means to get it.
Yeah, so visit www. Oh my gosh, Fran. How did I screw that up? Can we just start there and you can splice it in?
No.
Or we got to start over?
No, that's the beauty of this. Go ahead.
All right. It's www.bluelabel.com for more information and to find a dealer near you.
Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
You said you did some work in Pennsylvania also for a pipeline.
Yeah, a pipeline company. I worked with another consulting group called GES. They're out of Wall Township, New Jersey. That's actually where Marty went post-retirement from the state.
Yep, exactly.
I wasn't working with Marty. I was working with a different group there. The reclamation specialist for this company, he is actually lives in Louisiana, but oversees the pipeline reclamation all across the East Coast, basically, for one of the larger companies in the U.S. He had mentioned that, I keep failing, but my company is viewing reclamation as compliance rather than as a biodiversity opportunity or whatever. So we got to look at what was going on. I wound up looking through, a lot of what I try to do as an ecologist is find analogies that I can take the ecosystem and talk to it or talk about it in a way that people really understand. The best one I could find was a construction journal called Causes and Costs of Rework in Construction. and this journal looks at building failures, and it says that 50% of building failure happens because of poor planning, 41% of it's from poor installation of material, and only 9% of building collapse is like an act of God. Well, I started looking at that and then looking at how is your pipeline failing, and it almost all tied back to poor planning, that it was just one generic seed mix across, I think, a 200 or 300 mile stretch in Pennsylvania.
Which isn't real. Like, you couldn't walk a 200-mile stretch.
Well, the nice thing, GES is one of like 3 companies in the U.S. that has their beyond visual line of sight drone operation, so they can actually, like, I have a drone pilot's license. I would lose it if the FAA ever found out that I am flying it where I can't see it. They actually have this drone that's got like all these safety features on it, and they could fly it like 10 or 15 miles at a clip.
Wow.
So for pipeline stuff, they actually put like a couple different sensors on it, and we could get really good aerial photography. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Which is sweet. But yeah, it was funny because where they were failing a lot, like, were in these kind of wetter areas. And to me, I'm like, that should be the easiest stuff to restore. Well, then we start looking at the seed mix. It's like, oh, you don't have any deep-rooted species that would tolerate these conditions. And kind of the model we made was a little bit of extra cost. And that's what, the reclamation guys, my company's looking at this as a compliance thing. So they want to not put a lot of money into the upfront job on this. Well, we came in and said, well, you're actually spending more money over the life of the cycle by failing the first time, because now you have to go in and fix it. When you have to go into, you've got to drive 10 miles down your pipeline to fix a erosion feature. That means you're destroying all the native stuff that wasn't failing. So it's going to be a 2 to 3, sometimes 4 or 5 times increase to rework a site. And the model we came up with was like, it's actually going to be really, really good to put just a little bit extra in your planning and installation phase to minimize the amount of rework that you have to do. So that was a really fun project. And I think, at least for that company, I think that will probably change how they do pipeline restoration all along the East Coast of, we should probably map this out and have wetland species in our wetland areas. And
it's funny you mentioned, and I'd never thought about this before, but it's hitting me now. And we talked about this last time you were on. We had supplied 2-inch plugs for a pipeline project, and it was 500,000 plugs in one season. So you can imagine like 500,000 plugs. That's covering a large area. It was 5 items. Like, that's it for who knows how many miles. And one of the items we didn't grow when we were trying to get a sub in, and we're like, this, why don't we add a few things and give you a little bit more biodiversity throughout this? And they were like, no, these 5 things work. That's all we're doing. We don't care. And it was like, not thinking about how many different types of regions you're crossing through on that, whether it be upland, wetland, different types of soils, different communities that weren't really being serviced, because you're almost creating 5 plants for 500,000 plants is almost a monoculture.
Yeah. And then, I look at it like when I used to work at Barlow's in Seagert selling plants to people's houses, it's like, everyone wants hydrangeas. Well, if you don't have the right sun conditions and the right soil conditions, you just can't have a hydrangea, right?
Yeah.
But that's one of the interesting things we were looking at too on this pipeline is it's hilly in Pennsylvania, so you need some shade tolerant species on certain slopes and certain aspects, just because, and then you need some stuff that can take full sun in other areas. So just having that one blanket seed mix across that 800 miles, not only the soil and the moisture conditions change, but the sun and things like that. And it's like, it's all these seeds of success programs, right? It's the right seed in the right place at the right time. Well, I think that's the last thing we want to be doing is wasting seed or wasting plant material. So it would make a lot of sense to map it and think, oh, this is the shade tolerant, wetland mix that we're going to put down.
And I guess in certain areas, maybe it makes sense, like over 50% of New Jersey's coastal plain, but like you hit northern New Jersey, you're going through Piedmont, Ridge Valley, Appalachian, like all those pretty quickly. Like if you're traveling through an area like that, that's not going to be successful, I would imagine. Like, and obviously your client was finding it wasn't being successful.
Right. And yeah, what's it would be way faster if you could just put one thing in and just rip right through it, and not have to change your seed box out or not have to be thinking too much. Well, 3 years later, if you got to redo half of that, the stuff that you saved up front just goes right out the window kind of overnight.
Yeah. There's a cost just to mobilize a crew that is flat. And it's like, okay, I have a certain, like, these people are going to have to go to this area, whether it's for 1 minute or a month. There's a cost there in moving all the equipment, getting all the things there. And that is realistically probably the most or the highest costing line item of the entire project in most cases is that mobilization cost. So, so that's where it gets more expensive.
Yeah, and it's if you're going to mobilize them out there, if it's going to take an extra week to do it right the first time, it would make sense to just do it right the first time, or do it as best as we can the first time, rather than, this is just a compliance thing. Let's just do it as cheap as we can up front, and then next thing you know, 3-4 years later, you're dealing with erosion. Now you got to haul sediment back onto the site. You're driving to these remote areas, ripping up some of your good work that you already did just to get to the failure. So, it would make sense to just put in that little, and it's not like a lot, it's an extra day or two of planning that out, which, for a couple $1,000s up front, versus a couple $100,000 to fix the failure, it would really make a lot of sense. So
it's just those corners that you can't cut if you want to be successful. So
so what are they doing now? Have they adopted this model, or are they?
So we just put that out. I want to say we did that study last summer. I actually led a lot of it remotely from Wyoming. GES did the monitoring, and then we gave that client the report late last year. And now that's, I think, going to just be their model moving forward, is that we're going to actually map everything out before we create our plans.
And this, realistically, is something that not only is going to save them money in the long run, it's also way better for the habitat, the environment. The environment wins, the company wins,
and then the seeds win too. It's we don't. I mean, that's where I think I met you in person the first time, was the Native Seed Conference in DC last March. And it's like, we have this seed supply shortage. We don't want to be just throwing seeds on the ground just for the sake of throwing seeds on the ground. If we can figure out these seeds should go here, and these other ones go here, that would be a good thing for that whole entire industry, I think.
Yeah.
Totally. So I wanted to circle back. I know we talked about Doug Tallamy earlier, and for those of you who may not have listened to the first episode with Mike, you were a student of Doug, so you have a familiarity with Doug Tallamy. But you had mentioned seeing him at Monmouth University and how his work's kind of starting to spread to other ecosystems, grassland, sagebrush, steppe ecosystems. And you were saying he has kind of like a new way of classifying plants that you were excited about. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
And kind of how his work is transcending to other ecosystems. Yeah,
I do. I guess I'll kind of just start maybe with a little background on Doug. And I don't know how often, but you'll see there's like one book, The Foundation Pieces of Ecology, and it's like the top 100 papers in ecology, and you go back to these like early studies on succession, and then the theory of island biogeography. And I'm a pretty firm believer in I don't know if it's going to be 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, that Doug's 2004 paper, do non-native plants host generalist insect herbivores, is going to be one of the foundational pieces in ecology. That's a 2004 study, which then I worked for Tallamy as an undergrad at Delaware, 2006 to 2008, where that's when we found out, the native oak hosts over 500 species of Lepidopteran compared to, 10 to 15 on the non-native oak, and so on and so forth. I was doing some work with Dakota Skipper out in North Dakota, I guess last June, and then in October, the same exact study that Ptolemy was doing in 2006, they just did that with the Dakota skipper, and found, on these non-native grass species out there, the survival rate of the larvae and the biomass of any larvae that survived is way, way less in these grassland systems. And it's literally the same exact study that Meg Ballard and some of Ptolemy's grad students that I worked for did. So that was really, really cool to see, 15, 20 years later. One of the things that I'm really excited, I have an intern now working on a meta-analysis of insects in the sage grouse diet, and that sage grouse is the umbrella species in the western U.S. So I know the importance of it. Well, I go and see Ptolemy. I had coffee with him at Starbucks before his talk at Monmouth, and we just caught up for an hour. I hadn't seen him speak since 2017. I had him at the University of Wyoming when I was in grad school. And it's cool because he just refines his talk every single time, and there's a little bit of new information that comes out. What I had never seen before is he changed the narrative from native, non-native, and invasive species to talking about food webs to contributors, are those species of plants that are making positive contributions to the food web. Non-contributors, so those would be non-native species that don't really host insects or don't contribute to the food web, but they're not really invasive. They're just kind of sitting there. And then detractors are those non-native species that become invasive and can disrupt the food web and harm it. It was so simple the way that he explained it, but it was such a powerful way to kind of rephrase this. And it's like, if you have the option now, if you want to have songbirds in your yard, our number one contributor in the mid-Atlantic is going to be put a white oak there if that's going to host 537 species of Lepidopteran. That's a really, really strong contributor down to, you could get down into your native maples that are hosting, in the 100 to 130 species range. They're still contributors, but they're not as significant of contributors.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's cool because that's really, really helped me with some of this sage grouse work now. I'm looking at, if I plant this plant in my reclamation seed mix versus that plant, and if this thing's going to have, if I know that these birds eat leaf beetles and I put Rocky Mountain bee plant in and I have a 180-fold increase on leaf beetles versus if I put yarrow and I have a 3 or 4 times increase, maybe I want to choose this other one that I have a 180-fold increase. So I just think the way that he framed that and phrased it that's the first time I had seen it. It was so simple, and I just think it's going to be a real big game changer to just let people really understand what exactly he's saying rather than...
I think what's brilliant about it is if you want to get derailed, it's really easy to say, well, it's native, and have someone say, well, what's native? What are you considering native? Or it's invasive. Well, it's not invasive here. It's invasive there maybe, but like now you're splitting hairs and you're getting away from the real purpose of the topic, where this you're not really arguing. It's not really an argument or a conversation. Oh yeah, it's more factual.
There's a big push right now with the whole argument around invasive plants about like softening the language. And I'm actually, this is a weird correlation here. I'm listening to like a parenting book right now. And it was talking about how you should if you use softer language with your kids, it becomes, you're not bringing the conflict to them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, this is happening with the whole invasive plant thing. This is where my mind's going as I'm listening to this, and I know this is all going on. I'm like, this is what's happening with the whole invasive plant thing, is you're saying, hey, this is invasive. It's a bad plant. And then people are getting defensive and arguing about it. Instead of saying, hey, this is a plant that doesn't really contribute to the ecosystem, or it's detracting from the ecosystem, you're approaching it in a friendlier manner. The verbiage is friendlier. So you don't have that standoff where the person's defending the choice they made, and they're more likely to go, I don't want to say go along with what you're saying, but be open to what you're saying, instead of just saying, like, shutting down and standing off, right? Where I think it could run into some trouble is from we're talking about real estate agents and how they blend the lines sometimes, or blow the lines between what's really there and what's not. I think that could be happening from a marketing point of view. And you look at Butterfly Bush, and I can picture the salesman in my mind who is going to say this as they're giving a presentation to 100 people about Butterfly Bush and the new variety of Butterfly Bush, that, oh, this is a contributor. This is a plant that really contributes. It's great for butterflies. And when that's not exactly true, but they have the story in there of how it's a contributor. So that's where I could see it becoming
like the lines getting blurred.
Yes. But native and non-native, there is a distinct line there. It's like this is, and then you can actually get as particular as you want about those lines, but or really dissect those lines where contributor, non-contributor. That's where I could see there being, like, are there native plants that would be considered not contributors, and then are there non-native plants that are considered contributors? Because I could see that being the case.
Well, I think Ptolemy and Shropshire have that paper ranking Lepidoptera in use on. I can't remember how many plants they ranked, but I think that may be one way to look at it. And I agree with what you're saying. If you just go to somebody and say, like, I don't know, in the West, a lot of times, in the 80s, in the 90s, it was reclamation to our land use goal. And if our land use goal was domestic livestock, and domestic livestock like crested wheatgrass, which is a non-native, it doesn't invade, but if you create a monoculture, let's say on a pipeline, that monoculture is not going to go away. It's not going to spread into the sagebrush next to it. But to be able to give them an option of, you could still do that, or you could, use these 3 species, and not only are your livestock going to eat them, but you're contributing to the sage grouse food web, and you're contributing to the songbird food web. I think that's going to be a really powerful thing, and I think that's when you're working with other people. If you just go to them, point your finger, and say you're bad, you're turning them off. But if it's like, hey, you have a list here, and it may be in some scenarios that a white oak's just not going to grow on this property, so here's your suite of the 10 species that will grow, and here's what we know about each one of them. You kind of pick, and maybe you like the aesthetics of this one a little bit better, and you're willing to sacrifice that it hosts less species. But
and what's interesting too, I'm thinking about I'm tying all this together when we had Taylor Collins on from Force of Nature, and I'm thinking about him with the regenerative ranch, thinking, hey, like, livestock know, if you give them all their options, they know what to eat. They know how to, if they're not feeling well, what to eat to medicate themselves. Like, they know they're not going to eat something that's not good. Like, if you only give them one option, they'll eat that one option. But there's obviously better options that, depending on what's going on, they'll pick and choose and know what to eat that's healthiest for them. So even that, it's not just the diversity for the sagebrush. It could be for the health of the livestock, just by increasing that diversity of what's there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, I think just being able to frame it in a way that you give people an option and say, hey, I'm not telling you what has to go in your seed mix, but here's the suite of things that will grow here, and here's how each one of them may play a role in different ecosystem services, and especially in the food web realm of that, I think will be a pretty powerful thing.
So, before I change the subject, did you have something to add to that?
No, not really.
All right. It looked like you started to talk, so I'm like, I'm going to stop.
No, I was agreeing.
So you're involved in a lot of reclamation and restoration projects. How are reclamation and restoration starting to play a role in conservation efforts? You kind of, like, we had discussed a few things this morning and prior. How do you feel that they're playing larger roles?
Well, yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I think traditionally conservation, if you think about conservation, it's almost just don't develop, or just keep everything kind of pristine in the Garden of Eden. Well, we have such a big human population now, whether it's oil and gas or coal, or whether, with these electronic vehicles and things like that, we're mining rare earths now more than ever. we have to scar the earth to get the materials that we need for human beings to live.
Yeah.
So I think we're at this phase now where if we move reclamation beyond just erosion control and bare bones minimum compliance and actually start looking at reconstructing food webs and things like that, there's a lot of instances where I think we could repair the land better than it was through intentional reclamation and restoration efforts. So I think we're at this nexus where we just don't really have the option to say conservation is just, we're not going to touch anything anymore. It's like we have to touch parts of the earth if we can be intentional and put them back.
Yeah.
And
Well, what was it? We were talking this morning when you first came in about Bureau of Land Management and Conservation.
well, they just, I think Thursday or Friday of last week put out a conservation rule where they're saying on federal land that conservation is just going to be a land use, that leaving the land totally be is a use or an appropriate use, which gets
and not managed at all. Like
I think that's where there's a lot of controversy now. It's, I'll read 6 newspaper articles with people from 6 different angles, and every one of them has a different take on what it says and what it doesn't say. So it's really hard to know exactly. But yeah, I think we're gonna, in that instance, use our federal lands to extract various resources, restoring them in a manner such that our wildlife are going to use them, and our biodiversity will respond favorably. That's just going to have to be part of the equation of conservation. So it's kind of, if you drew a Venn diagram, restoration and conservation, I think have kind of a lot of overlap, but there's a lot of things that are not right there. But I think they're kind of merging into each other a lot more.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that statement from Bureau of Land Management? How do you feel about that, like for land use, that it will just be conservation? Like, what are the downfalls of that?
There are, it's tricky because there's one of like the new paradigms in rangeland management is called conservation of pattern and process. And this guy, Fullendorf, wrote that paper, I think in 2012, and basically says like, he's looking at grazing and fire, and those were the range management tools. We still don't really know how oil and gas and mining and things like that play into the very long-term. It's getting back to that long-term succession. It's like, what is this going to look like 100 years after we're gone because of what we did today, kind of a thing. But what they're saying in that paper is historically we've been targeting saving one or a few species of plants and wildlife, and in doing so, we're not being great at conserving overall biodiversity. So like for the sage grouse, for example, if we're just trying to conserve sagebrush, we may be missing a lot of these early successional species that play different roles in that environment. So yeah, in that regard, they're saying having these kind of patchy mosaics in the landscape, and ideally if they're native and they're contributing mosaics, and we have different things in bloom at different times, and like that with sagebrush, for example, the older it gets, the less nutritious it becomes. It becomes woodier, it becomes higher in carbon, lower in nitrogen, less protein, versus a 2 or 3 year old sagebrush. That's where you're going to see the antelope grazing. That's where you're going to see, if a grouse has the preference of eating. It's why you spend $15 buying microgreens versus $3 buying a brown spinach when you go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's pros and cons to just leaving things be, that having, wildfire is kind of a thing that should just regenerate a system. And maybe, if we look at, like I have a study from last summer, which I'm really excited about, looking at a pipeline system up in Pinedale, and we're finding 4 to 6 times more insects on our reclaim.
Really?
Where our reference is this 80 to 150-year-old monoculture of sagebrush. And it's like that kind of needed a rejuvenation. I don't know if pipeline was the best thing for it, but now that we have these 2 and 3 and 4-year-old successional species, there's some benefit to that.
Yeah.
But sir, how long is monitor monitoring like that been going on? Is that relatively new? So it's more new information that you're finding out that some of this is more beneficial because there had never been a need to monitor it before.
The insect stuff that I did when I was in grad school on oil and gas is really the first insect work on oil and gas ever, and that was all on the well pad systems. I think this study I did last summer is the first real scientific endeavor on the pipeline systems. But
and it took a Jersey boy for that.
It took a Talamine boy, I think. Really. But no, I think being in that Talamine lab is what led me to that. But and I look at like that Pennsylvania thing. If you look at that company's pipeline and then you overlay that like monarch butterfly corridor, that pipeline's almost like the artery of it. So if like we could be intentional and every 3/4 of a mile we had a 10-foot swath of milkweed, that might be the biggest conservation success story for monarchs out there.
Yep.
Well, and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say before we get too far along. I've been reading this book for a while now. I've even talked about it a little bit on previous episodes. It's called The Earth Transformed, and it's talking about how important some of this disturbances. Well, I shouldn't say how important it is, but it's talking about disturbance and how human disturbance goes back like 10,000 years plus. It's just at a much faster scale now. We've kind of gone a little overboard. I shouldn't say a little overboard. We've gone very overboard. But a lot of these, we like to think of nature as this like peaceful place when realistically it is as chaotic as they come. It is constant things fighting each other and dying off and opening up for new opportunities. There's like this whole concept of balance in nature is not true.
No.
It is like it's constantly just they're killing each other.
No, and it's funny,
and it's supposed to is how it works. But the balance thing comes from humans coming through, and again, this is going back like 10,000 years, where you'd have Native Americans going through and causing fires, controlled fires, so that they could keep nature, those natural environments, how they wanted, that were most advantageous for them. And then, as I'm only like 3/4 of the way through the book, but once you get to like European colonization in North America, that's when it was more, they were approaching saying, oh, this is what it looked like. They had more of that mentality of like nature's in one spot and we're in another. And so we need to make this all cleared. But they weren't looking at what Native Americans had done prior to that, because when they got here, the Native Americans weren't on that area. They're seeing forests that hadn't been managed for decades at that point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just like what you're saying is, we're looking at it and saying, oh, we don't want to touch this, or BLM is saying we don't want to touch this, and that's conservation. But that piece of land has, in a way, been managed for the last 10,000 years, and what we're seeing is untouched, had been touched for millennia.
Yeah.
And, so it's, I just want to reflect on that for a little bit. It's more me thinking out loud.
I've seen a lot of untouched woods that aren't healthy.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it healthier or a better system.
Yeah, one of, I think it was 2013, I was in grad school in Wyoming, and I went to Delaware for this. It was a conference called Earth Perfect, Nature, Utopia, and the Garden. Annette Giesica, I actually have a background in ancient Greek and Roman studies when I was from Delaware, but it was a utopian philosopher, Annette Giesica at University of Delaware, who put that on. And the two keynote speakers were Talamy and then a woman named Emma Maris, who, I don't know if you know that name. She wrote the book Rambunctious Garden.
I do.
And a lot of people may think, she's Talamy's like nemesis, and I happen to be kind of friends with both of them. I had Emma out in Wyoming as well, and she gave this really interesting talk about what you're talking about, Tom, where she said, she starts off with a picture of the Garden of Eden, and she's like, that's what I thought nature was, and you think of nature as something that's unmanaged and unchanging. Well, in the whole world, what do people think is the most natural system? Oftentimes is Yellowstone in Wyoming. Yeah. So she comes from Klamath Falls, Oregon, and she's speaking in front of a bunch of professors and grad students at UW, University of Wyoming. And she says, a lot of people in the world think Yellowstone is the most natural system. Her next slide is a bunch of guys at 3:00 in the morning taking cutthroat trout out of the Yellowstone Lake. And she says, this is the most stealthily managed system in the whole entire planet. Yeah. The only reason why people think it's unchanging is because you've got people at 3 a.m, taking fish out, and they're managing that to like the number of individuals in every lake in that whole entire park. So I think you're right. And I think sometimes that's a really hard thing to grasp. And that's like, I just did a big meta-analysis in the Jonah Field, which happens to be part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It's 70 miles south of the park itself. We've gotten on 7,300 acres, so that's 1,200 well pads in the pipeline system spread out over, a 10 by 10 mile area. I think we're at 91% native, 1.5% invasive, or that's cheatgrass. And then we have about 7 or 8% crested wheatgrass, which is one of those non-contributors. It's a non-native. And it's cool because now we know where our invasives are, and I think we'll be able to take them out. I think, in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be at 0 invasive. And the goal is to kind of move that 91% up. And there's an argument, we took out this sagebrush steppe. Well, that's 150-year-old sagebrush that's providing cover for these birds, but it's not supporting any insects or any of the food web. But it's hard to grasp because it's like we intentionally put the bee plant and the yarrow and the flax and the penstemon. Last summer was really wet. We saw Ratibida, this Mexican hat, from a seed mix from 7 years ago that hadn't showed itself for 7 years. Wow. And because we got more rain than normal, it's up there. I kind of wonder, like 50 years from now, when those wells are plugged and abandoned and the Jonah Industries is no longer there, that skeleton, I would think, is going to be the most healthy part of the whole entire ecosystem in Sublette County, Wyoming, because we went in and ripped the land up, and that company is a very responsible company. There might be another company in a different area of the country that is letting things get out of control, invasive. But so it's really hard to, you're managing for now, but what's it going to be like 50 years from now? Maybe that was a really good thing, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know what's going to happen in 50 years.
I was going to ask, like, having worked for the oil companies in Wyoming and then working on the pipeline in PA, are you seeing a major difference on how those lands are managed, or does that come down to the philosophy of the company? I'm not asking you to say names or anything like that, but is it coming down to the company, or is it government, or is it just a combination?
A little bit of all of that. I think some of it's company-wide, some of it's out west, what's way different than out east is there's so much federal, like 49% of the state of Wyoming is federally owned. So you have federal land mandates in a lot of areas. One of the things in Wyoming that I'm just kind of lucky that I've been part of it is that whole sage grouse issue that we have out there. If that bird becomes listed as endangered, and that's the umbrella species of the sagebrush steppe, that has major negative consequences. So companies are they've got to do good. We don't have the option not to. Where if you're on private land, in New Jersey, there's less scrutiny probably. There's not as many people looking at it. It's probably not making national news. But then, I think, this whole recent kind of ESG movement and sustainability as a thing that investment groups are going into, a lot of companies are saying, man, we have to do a good job. So in Colorado, I'm working with one of the largest oil and gas companies in North America, and they're saying we want to create a pipeline system that is way better pollinator habitat than what we had before. And part of it's an investment story, and I don't really care about that. I care about restoring the ecosystem, and if their avenue is we want investors, and my avenue is like, well, this is the right thing to do anyway. It's a win for me and for them. And then it's a lot of times it's the people, like that guy from Louisiana. I think he met GES at the Wildlife Habitat Council thing and said, I have to do better, and I want my legacy inside this company to be.
And I'm good with that. There's a company this is going back 15 years, and I'm not going to. We had to sign a non-disclosure agreement when we supplied the material, but
Well, you better not say too much, Fran.
No,
That's breaking a non-disclosure agreement, right?
It's passed. It's passed now. It's passed. It was until they could promote it themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm still not going to say who it was, but it was a company that created a 40-acre wetland to treat wastewater out of their plant. And I'm like, I don't care what the company is, or I'm just happy that they're doing it. Like this was 40 acres of wetland that was created that's performing a great function, and they're doing it instead of the alternatives. And we signed a non-disclosure because they wanted to be able to promote it and market it in the way that they wanted to.
Yeah.
They didn't want it to come out. They wanted to control the narrative, which, hey, you want to create 40 acres of wetland, I'm completely okay with that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I mean it's one of the things that I've noticed a lot of times when you have people doing the environmentalist or the reclamation specialist or whatever role they are in with the company, when they live there, and a lot of times you'll see this with smaller companies, so Pure West in Pinedale, Wyoming, and Jonah Energy, which is just south of Pinedale. Most of the people that work for those companies live there, and most of those people are hunters and fishers, and they'll tell you as you drive through the field and you listen to them for long enough of the story of the first antelope that they shot when their dad took them hunting when they were a kid was it was right over on this ridge, and I want my kid to be able to have that same experience. And therefore I'm going to make darn sure that this well pad is 15 years from now when my kid's old enough to go hunting for the first time. There's going to be wildlife back where I got my first one. So it's stuff like that that's really kind of cool.
And if you're leaving the land better than how you found it, is that bad? No. At least as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I mean a lot of times out there anyway, that's the driver of the economy. Like everybody's got to have a job. If working for an oil and gas or mining company is the option of your job. If you're taking that and being a good steward, I think that's an important thing. So it's kind of cool.
Stay tuned for more of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
Now, I just want to do a disclaimer here because we're just talking about these instances. We're not not saying all of this is good. We're not talking about fracking in Pennsylvania or anything. And we know that there's issues all over with some of these things. We're talking about some of the more successful ones that we've seen.
And I think how it's a model for how things
you can do it better.
Done.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what I've noticed is kind of cool. So, while I'm talking about Jonah Energy, they're the first oil and gas company to ever win the Distinction in Reclamation Award for the American Society of Reclamation Sciences, which they'll get in Knoxville in June. Wow. Their society's been around for 41 years. That's going to be a big topic at this Sage Grouse meeting in Cheyenne on Monday. I think every other oil and gas company in the state of Wyoming is going to say that's now our bar. That's the best in the country, and we're aiming to be them. So I think it's important to highlight that stuff, because think about it, if you saw another nursery doing something,
I do it all.
We do it all the time.
That's what we need to be aiming at. Right? So
No, definitely. I'm sorry, you looked like you had something.
No, I was. I guess I could finish up and say, I think that's a part of every company's mission should be giving back to the environment in some way, because we're all taking, like even us, we're taking still, even with the plants we're putting out, we're probably taking more than we give. But it's really not, in the grand scheme of things. I think we've outlined a lot here. It's not that much more expensive, even on a personal level, to make a choice where, okay, this is something that is contributing versus not contributing or detracting. You can have something where it's giving a little bit. This is going to be my final thought, so I'm kind of giving that away a little early. But you can do something where it's contributing to the environment. It's still an extractive process, but we're giving something back. We're taking a little bit of that cost on the chin, but it's the right thing to do. And I think there's just a lot of people who aren't there yet, that aren't doing that yet, and either through ignorance or they just don't know, or I doubt I shouldn't say I doubt. There's definitely plenty of places that don't care and are doing it out of spite, but I think those are in the minority when it comes down to folks who don't know and don't realize, for 10% more or 5% more, I can do something that's actually doing a lot of good versus something that's doing very little. Yeah, I think if you give them that choice, a lot of people are willing to make that small investment to do a lot better. I mean, even like you do a hospital landscape.
Yeah.
It's like if they knew I could have something that maybe it's not as pretty, but it's doing so much for wildlife and butterflies and birds and all this stuff. I think they would make the choice to do that versus not, if they know and if they have the cost saying, it's only X amount more up front.
I mean, because we drive by things that we feel have been done wrong all the time. Oh, yeah. It's always great, like when they did the Capitol Health Hospital, like the wetlands in the back they did were incredible. Yeah. Like the amount of planning. They did it right, and it's always appreciative when it's done right, because it's not always done right. Because sometimes doing it right just takes a little, not even much more, as you were saying. It doesn't take a lot more. Sometimes it just takes a little bit more. Yep. But it's easy to fall back into old ways.
And I think, just human nature, if you educate somebody about anything, whether it's, their diet, their landscape, their financial habits, if you say, you have 5 different ways of doing things and give them. So I think a lot of times with the landscape and the restoration and reclamation, sometimes people just don't know.
Yeah.
And, I'd see that when I worked at Barlow's, somebody that lives in New York City and has an oceanfront house in Seagirt. I want hydrangeas because I like the pink flower. I'm like, they're not going to grow in your yard just based on the side of the house that you want them on. Then 4 months later, these didn't work. Yeah. I'm like, how are you that successful in life that you have a $5 million house on the beach and you don't understand the concept that?
It's amazing.
Sometimes it's a matter of perspective too. We just had an instance. I'm on one of the counties that I live in, soil conservation, and I was talking with the director about a bioretention basin, or it was a basin that was retrofitted to be a bioretention basin in another county, and we went to look at it as a nursery. He went to look at it, and it was being considered a failure because 3/4 of it had naturalized. And he goes, but that 3/4 of the basin doesn't get used as a basin. Only the quarter that does is functioning properly. So why should this be a failure when it naturalized and is performing ecosystem functions? Yeah. It's just you could keep it a basin, which it doesn't want to be and it doesn't need to be. Like, it's just a matter of, you have one person saying this is highly successful and another one saying this is a failure.
Yeah.
And it's just how you look at it in education.
Yeah. So typically our guest is running out on time on this. I'm actually running out on time a little bit. But what are some of the things, like some of the new studies that you've done recently that you found are really cool, or even just something that you've done recently that you think is really cool, or people should know about? You
had mentioned like advancements in predictive modeling, things like that.
So I've been fortunate. In 2021, I was invited to be an author and a collaborator on a global study. It was called Drivers of Seedling Establishment Success in Dryland Restoration, and we looked at hundreds or thousands of restoration projects in arid systems all across the world. I think there was 24 of us from Canada, the U.S., China, Africa, Europe, like basically every continent but Antarctica. And we're really starting to get into this big data where we have all these data sets and we're analyzing them now. Just late last year, I think I was like author 7 out of 10 or author 6 out of 9 or something like that on a paper testing the hierarchy of predictability in grassland ecosystems across a aridity gradient. So that was just in the U.S. And what we're finding is, and it makes a lot of sense, is that the more limiting our environment becomes, the more predictable our restoration outcomes are. That if we understand our limitations, that the more limited we are, the less possible outcomes we have. Therefore, the more predictable we are. I'm excited about that because I think I can take that. I'm not in the academic realm, so it's exciting to be on some of these publications now, but it's also exciting. I can go to a pipeline company or a well pad company or a transmission line company and say, let's understand your limiting factors and then design our seed mixes accordingly, or design our soil handling techniques accordingly. And that all lines right back into this whole Seeds of Success programs out there, and kind of what we were talking about earlier. If we know what we're limited by up front, and we know, this is a salty environment, we're going to use a native salt-loving plant. We're going to see success that way. And I don't think have to take that shotgun approach anymore, that we're just going to throw everything into a mix and call it a diverse mix because it's got 40 species. If 38 of them are going to fail, we got to understand that. So that's been cool.
It's funny with that. We've been having a lot of talk with Seeds of Success through, we're members of the Northeast Native Seed Network and the Restorative Landscape Coalition. And it's trying to adopt some of these in the Northeast, but the Northeast is so different than where a lot of these strategies are adopted. Can you really follow it the same way? Because it's not the same, and looking at that. And it's hard to make those distinctions sometimes. Like, are we doing a disservice by trying to follow this in another part of the country because it's a little bit different?
Yeah, no, I think, this stuff is all going to be cool. And I think that, as people start realizing that the Northeast isn't the Southwest, it's going to be a good thing. Probably the thing I'm actually most excited about right now, I'm working on a grant. It's through the Wyoming Game and Fish. They have 9 sage grouse local working groups across the state of Wyoming, and I think 7 of them funded this. I'm actually doing a state of Wyoming-wide survey to reclamation and restoration practitioners, and I've learned in the last 6 months, maybe more than I learned throughout my PhD process, and I've gotten 7 or 8 white papers so far from practitioners. One guy, 43 years experience, in Southwest Wyoming, working on a coal mine. I'm not even 40 years old, so it's kind of like that saying, like, he's probably forgotten more in his pinky than I've ever even thought about.
Yeah.
One of the guys has been for 34 or 35 years the reclamation specialist on the North Antelope Rochelle mine, which is the largest coal mine or the open pit coal mine in North America. It might be in the world. But I was on the phone with him last Thursday night for like an hour and a half, and he's like, it's just all agriculture stuff that I've based it on. And, in 1987, when this new piece of equipment came out, it allowed me to broadcast and drill my seed mix at the same time. And then in 1994, when this thing came out, I made these modifications. And then it's amazing because I'm trying to extract this information that these, an oil and gas guy for 20 years now is like, he's talking about the same exact stuff. His process is the same, but he's in a 4-inch precipitation zone where this other guy's in a 14-inch precipitation zone.
Wow.
But it's cool. He's talking about how important it is to have your seed bed prepped. And it says, I found that when a 6'1", 218-pound man can stick his cowboy boot 1/4 of an inch into the ground at a normal walking pace, that's when I can put my seed into the ground. If it's less than 1/8 of an inch, it's too hard. And if it's more than 1/2 of an inch, it's too soft.
Wow.
So that's been really cool. I'm starting to synthesize that, and I'll be putting a survey out. I think across those white papers, there's like 136 years of experience, and it's just been stuff you don't really learn in academia, where they're talking about how deep they have to rip the spoil pile before they introduce the topsoil on top of it. I won't seed if I don't have too hard frosts in October, I won't seed until February because my sagebrush is not going to get the stratification it needs. It's wild, so that's super exciting. I actually, am doing some work now. The University of Wyoming just got this new genome lab, and I'm going to be doing some work this summer collecting sage grouse, fecal pellets, all the insect work I've been doing. Now I'll actually be able to see what insects grouse are eating. So I'm going to be getting DNA sequences off, I think, 3,000 insects I sampled last summer. And that now this summer I'll actually be going out and looking at bird poop and figuring out what components of restoration and reclamation are they eating, vegetation and insect-wise. So that's super exciting. And then, I hope to get back and do some stuff in the Meadowlands. And,
you have a lot going on.
Yeah.
You're saying you're getting ready to sign a 1-year lease on a place in Wyoming, right?
Yeah, out in Pinedale. So it's going to, 2,000 people population. It's on the base of the Tetons in the Wind River. So you guys will have to come out there.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, no, I just will be, I'll be coming back to New Jersey as much as I can, but I have to be out there. I can't be flying out there every month for 1 or 2 days of work. I'm going to have to be there. So
Awesome.
Yeah. So no, a lot of cool stuff going on. And I'm hoping, it's crazy to me because I go back to that, what we talked about in the beginning, that Halamies do non-native plants host general insect herbivores. And we're really starting to find that that's true in Wyoming, and it's true in North Dakota, and it's true in Colorado. Wow.
I'm looking forward to the 1-year follow-up on this conversation to find out how all that went. It's amazing how quickly we run. I don't even know if we've even really talked about everything that we wanted to talk about. But we are going to go to our perennial last question, which you've answered before, and I'm curious if you're going to give a different answer this time, and that's, what is your favorite native plant?
I am still going to say Rocky Mountain bee plant out in Wyoming. That is Abnova Ecological Solutions. That's my company's logo. And I'm actually finding more and more cool stuff about it. So last year, 180 times more chrysomelids when I have that in my seed mix than when I don't.
Really?
My intern is finding, after ants, leaf beetles from the chrysomelid family are like the next big source of protein for grouse. So I'm like, I liked it because it established in disturbed soils and traps snow moisture in these arid environments. But now it's like, it's a contributor.
Nice.
So it's just getting better and better.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Awesome.
And without people like you doing that research, we may not have known that, which is fantastic. I really appreciated this. This has been a fantastic. It's something that we've been trying to do more, is revisit some of the topics that we've done in the past and do follow-ups. We do it on a small scale with like Mount Cuba, but this has been wonderful. I really appreciate it. And doing this in person as well has been fantastic.
Yeah, no, I just love to come out here. I think you guys have an amazing operation going on out here. So I'm actually, that was one of my favorite things I did all of last year was I think you guys just got that new seed sorting machine.
Oh yeah.
You were just testing out. I think your brother had just gotten married, so you saw his wedding area over there, and then that limitation stuff we were talking about. You guys were doing that Spartina salt bath deal. Yeah. So no, it's cool to come out here. So thanks for having me on.
You missed the craziness this morning because we had 5 common carriers come in and pick up at the same. You wouldn't have been able to even get into park this morning. That's how crazy it was. So you just missed it. But
it's a little nuts.
So this is where we do the final thought, and we start with you. We hand the floor over. You can summarize, promote, mention something that we didn't talk about, but the floor is yours. You can use it however you'd like.
Sure. Well, first I'll just say thanks for having me on. I always enjoy coming out here, and I guess I'll leave it with I'm excited about this new concept of contributors, non-contributors, and detractors, and I hope listeners do a little bit of their own research and think about what you want on your property or on your projects, and know that you have options of you can choose how much or how little you want to contribute to the landscape and to the food web, and I hope people start choosing to become contributors.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was almost exactly what I was going to say. I even though it might have sounded like I was not bashing the language, but I think that's a great way to start approaching all this. Is you have things that contribute or plants that contribute maybe don't contribute and then detract. And it goes for people too, is make that decision to be a contributor. And maybe it's not, you're sacrificing elsewhere. It might not be as showy, or you don't get that pink mop flower head of a hydrangea, but you're doing something where it's contributing to the environment and doing a lot more than something that might look pretty.
Awesome. Mine was, I was just kind of struck that I was thinking about Dr. Talamy's first book, and it could have been easy for him to stop there. But it keeps evolving and improving the same way your work does, or all this work. Like, it's great to talk about these things, but you can't just put them away and say, that's fine. Like, that is what it is, the next thing. Everything's constantly evolving and improving. And I appreciate all the people doing the work to keep diving into this and looking in and finding deeper meetings, finding more interactions, finding better ways. And it doesn't stop with having one idea and moving on. It kind of keeps evolving. So I appreciate that it wasn't one book. It's been multiple books and multiple papers and multiple research, just to keep refining this and getting it better and learn more. It just doesn't end, and it shouldn't end, because nothing stays the same.
Yeah. And I took a buddy of mine who actually works for Johnson & Johnson, but he was out of Monmouth's biology program. He is a big donor to Monmouth. Came up and saw Talamy. He's already changed the landscape in his own yard. And he was asking me, I said, his message hasn't really changed all that much from 2005, 2006. It's just gotten better. And he's, making these incremental advancements. And he's like, it's almost like, a stand-up comedian that you never have you just refine it over and over. And then you hope one day you have your masterpiece and it's the, the best. But that's what, I thought it was funny he said that. I'm like, that's really what I've been impressed with Talamy is, he's just getting better, and he's not doing rocket science. It's just finding little advancements here and there and getting better at, conveying the message. So it's been cool.
If you can reach more people, regardless of the means, it makes a big difference. And he had a way and continues to find a way to make that circle larger, which is the most important thing, to get more people thinking about this and being willing to do a little bit more. So it just kind of hit me overwhelming as we revisit this thing, and it makes me think we should revisit some of these things we revisited over the last 4 years, just to see what's changed, what's different, how's it gotten better. It hasn't gotten worse.
Yeah.
So I think it plays a big part, and thank you for being a part of that transition for us doing some of these things.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely.
Awesome.
Well, that's going to wrap us up today. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed listening to Michael Curran from Abnova. For more information, you can visit his website, which is
abnovaecology.com.
abnovaecology.com. We appreciate you joining us for another episode of Native Plants, Healthy Planet, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
Thank you to the Egocentric Plastic Men for our theme music for our Meet the Guest episodes. Make sure you stream or buy their music wherever you consume music. You can even go see them live. They're in and about the Philadelphia area. Follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at @nativeplants_healthy planet, or at Pinelands Nursery, and also YouTube at Pinelands Nursery. Don't forget about that question and comment line. You can call us at 215-346-6189. I will repeat that, 215-346-6189. Ask a question or leave a comment. We'll do our best to play it on a future episode of The Buzz. And want to say hello to all the new members of the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. Got another insurge and just keeps getting bigger, and the community keeps getting kinder. So we appreciate all the people that have become a part of that.
Yeah, so you can listen to Native Plants Healthy Planet. What am I saying? You can listen to Native Plants Healthy Planet at our website, www. Oh my gosh, I'm really stumbling today. www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. You can also find us on Apple Podcast, Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, really wherever you consume your podcasts. If you haven't already, leave a 5-star review, hit subscribe. Those go a really long way to helping us. And if you do a write-up with those 5-star reviews, I give you a shout-out on our Buzz episodes. You can also find our merch store on our website, and we don't keep any of the profits from anything you buy that says Native Plants Health Planet on it. We give them away. So it's I haven't looked to
I was
see
gonna
what
say- I
our
was
total
just
was.
gonna ask
I meant
if we're
to,
close
and,
to giving away
Yeah, I
again.
haven't done it yet. So,
All right.
yeah, awesome. With that, thank you, everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone. Mike, again, thank you for being here with us in person. Coming up next week, we have a Buzz episode, so make sure you tune in for that. And until then, keep it native.
In meadows, woods, wetlands, and dales grows a bounty of beauty that never fails. Our native plants, so diverse and so rare, treasures of our land beyond compare. From the ferns below, soaring oaks above, each plant has a place each family's love. Monarch caterpillars launch milk, wheat so tall, bees buzz about, sipping nectar fall. Oh, native plants, how you grace this land. In your diversity, we will take a stand. To protect and preserve our generations to come, and beauty and potency second to none. To protect and preserve the earth, to restore the native plant movement you just can't ignore.
Goldenrod, asters, and flowers galore. Monarch is so stunning, can't help but adore. Their colors, their fragrance, a feast for the eyes. Their value to wildlife, no need to disguise.
Native plants, how you grace this land. In your diversity, we will take a stand.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.